welcome to another gameplay commentary video for GiantSlayerTV. This gameplay was once again played by Faye on the latest update, patch 11.24b. The patch shook up parts of the meta such as several nerfs to Mutant champions, buffs to Samira and Fiora, and a whole bunch of other adjustments. Keep in mind this will be the patch for the next few weeks due to the holidays. For today's game, we'll be breaking down the major decisions of the game, talk about potential mistakes, and ways to improve. With all that said, let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helps make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our GiantSlayerTV social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. As this is all about the gameplay, we can kick off the video by covering the early game and the opening carousel. Right away, the first decision of the game comes down to, generally, player preference. Faye's plan was to grab the early bow and use it for Giant Slayer later on, as it's one of the strongest damage items in the current meta. Unable to secure it, she instead ends up with the belt with the intent to use it for a defensive item later, such as Warmogs or Sunfire Cape. Defensive openers are great for flex play and trying to win streak. Keep in mind if you're looking to play a reroll build or want best in slot items, that winning isn't ideal early on since you won't have priority on the carousel. With the carousel covered, we can move on to stage 1. Let's be honest, stage 1 is pretty cut and dry nowadays. The only real decision is whether or not you want to pick up certain pairs or not, and a lot of it is dictated by the orbs. Pray to Mort Dog for early gold orbs, otherwise there won't be a lot you can do with your early shops. The Mort gods have blessed Faye this day, for she did receive gold in round 1, letting her buy out the full shop in the next round for more options later on. Blitzcrank from an early orb can be great since it's easy to play scrap, but instead she opts to sell it and buy out the full shop. It's also a viable option to wait and see whether more gold drops in the next round, but it's really player preference at that point. It's augment time! Balance Team has done a great job diversifying augments, so there's overall more options to choose from each game. Unfortunately for Faye, these options aren't particularly amazing. Exiles this early can help win rounds, but may not be ideal later on. Clockwork Heart is the best all-around choice for flex play, though Faye ends up choosing On Guard since challengers are doing well in the meta and forcing them isn't too difficult. And as always, try to scout out and see what other players picked up as their augments so nothing catches you off guard once stage 2 begins. Speaking of, let's move on to stage 2. This is where decisions are made to either win or loss streak depending on how strong or weak your opening board is. Round begins and Faye has overall a decent board. On Guard will be useful having a Camille 2 and Quinn, while Poppy 2 and Darius provide extra frontline. Unfortunately, she has nothing great to slam in terms of items, but overall this is a strong opening board. But of course, it's always possible to play against someone that got just a bit luckier than you. As luck would have it though, Faye barely managed to scrape together a win against a scrap board that had an early Vi 2. Mort God is truly favoring her today. With stage 2-2 just about to begin, Faye decides to commit to buying Caitlyn 2 and dropping the Darius. The value of Caitlyn is in her ability as it can one-shot most enemies early on in the game, so though losing Bodyguard hurts her frontline, extra damage should help win rounds. An important note to take here is that it's worth being diligent with scouting early on because Blitzcrank can absolutely demolish strong boards if positioned poorly. This is demonstrated during the 2-2 fight as the enemy board is running Blitz and it pulls the Quinn instead of the much more valuable Caitlyn 2. Faye is sitting in a great spot at the end of 2-3 with 10 gold in the bank and a win streak of 3. Saving health in these early stages can often ensure a top 4 spot later on, though winning does come at a price. The price is, of course, carousel priority. Being last pick or even second to last pick means whatever component you want, you ain't gonna get, unless luck is really on your side. But as we see during this carousel, all of the would-be components Faye desperately wants to use later on for a challenger comp are being scooped up. With no swords, bows, or gloves available, that means her only real option is a belt to use for Warmogs. On the plus side, it is Taric, so it can be used for Socialite. And Taric with Warmogs is great as a frontliner, so all in all, not that bad of a carousel round considering she had the last pick. The rest of stage 2 played out perfectly for Faye with a 5-win streak at Krugs. There is a looming issue for her board though. That is a lack of upgrades in Challenger champions, which is definitely a problem considering the goal is to play Challenger. Items are also looking a bit dire, as all that dropped was 1 bow. 2 bows isn't the worst for Challenger, but being such high health going into stage 3, the chances of losing enough by the next carousel for a faster priority is unlikely. It's not an 8th at this point, but it does seem as though her luck is dried up. Just as the round is about to begin on 3-1, Faye opts to level up to 6. It's a common play when on a win streak, though her board doesn't get substantially stronger with just a Darius 1. But at the end of the day, it was the correct play to win the round, especially since her opponent was also leveled to 6. A potentially questionable play is made by selling the Urgot, but keep in mind Faye is aiming to play Challenger. Being flexible is important, but without any other Chemtech champions on board or on bench, and no real items to give Urgot, he wasn't really doing a whole lot to the board's overall strength. Urgot may be strong, but he's not broken. Faye failed to properly scout and position against Blitzcrank, and Caitlyn got bopped because of it. In reality, this doesn't end up making much of a difference as the other player leveled and rolled for a big power spike. Regardless of whether Caitlyn was pulled or not, a 4-Bruiser board with several upgraded champions is going to win against the majority of compositions at this point in the game. Decision Time's Augment number 2 is now available. Keep in mind the gameplay at this point is still to play Challenger. Stand United can be a strong choice, but Challenger usually has a few active traits, so the bonus won't be that amazing. Makeshift Armor isn't particularly useful since the aim of the game is fast fights. That leaves Enforcer Heart as the only real choice here, which isn't terrible since Fiora is a Challenger and also an Enforcer, and Faye is currently using Caitlyn on her board. And of course, scout to see what other players took as their augments at this stage of the game. The rest of Stage 3 was a series of unfortunate events for Faye. And by events, we mean losses. That's alright though, because one of the benefits to winning throughout Stage 2 is having health to use later on as a resource, so a few losses in Stage 3 won't make or break the game. It's worth noting too that there weren't any major power spikes available since Faye decided not to roll at level 6. She was able to make a Rage Blade from the Carousel, but a Rage Blade isn't likely to win rounds, especially on an item holder like Caitlyn. Overall, Faye's in a decent position at this point in the game since she did hit level 7 with 50 gold. With that said, oof. The components are not being all that favorable as not a single sword has been seen. The time has come to roll. Without too much gold spent, Faye manages to hit a Samira 2 and several 4-cost units. It's not the strongest Stage 4 board, but it is a substantial boost in strength compared to her previous board. She opts to go with Samira carry for a few reasons. 1, Samira was buffed in the B patch while Yone was more or less nerfed, though by how much is hard to say just yet. Second reason is that while her items aren't amazing, they at least function better on Samira than, say, Fiora. Ideally, with Rage Blade, the go-to carry is Kaisa, but that more or less requires a lot of luck to hit, having only rolled a few times on level 7. Here we see a decent shop with Quinn 2 and a Warwick in it. At this point in the game with 60 health, either the player can keep rolling to find more upgrades, or level to 8 in a few rounds. Faye decides to roll a bit because 6 Challenger is such a major spike, plus finding Fiora would help a lot, especially since one of the augments is currently not being utilized. With a few upgrades to hit this round, a dub means Faye can begin making her way to level 8. Even though the previous round was a win, this one will definitely not be a surprise. A Trundle 3 shows up and chomps Faye's board to death. Turns out, scouting is useful, but much like earlier when Faye didn't properly scout, knowing about the Trundle 3 or not really wouldn't make much of a difference. That player hits a major power spike while Faye is aiming to level 8 on an average board. A loss was guaranteed here regardless of how well the player positioned. After that previous loss in the Carousel round, it's now time to level to 8. The plan is simple. Find Fiora, play 6 Challenger, and 2 Enchanter. If possible, play Kaisa over Warwick and try to upgrade the rest of the board. As for the endgame goal for this comp, ideally Faye is looking to hit Samira 3 or even possibly Fiora 3. Finally, we've reached the third and final augment. At this point in the game, for this particular composition, Faye is looking for anything that passively benefits her board. Unfortunately, these augments aren't amazing. Share the Spotlight does nothing for her board, and an Academy Crest can be good for Fiora to carry, but it requires switching up a lot of her board and may not pan out. That means Cybernetic Implants are the only real option, which isn't bad since extra health and damage is useful for this board. And as always, scout the other player's augment choices. There's not a lot for Faye to do at this stage of the game with her economy as she hit the major upgrades for her board. As mentioned earlier, the goal is to find Samira 3 and Kaisa, but since her board is able to win rounds, rolling down to 0 is not worth it. Instead, the game plan going into the late game is to roll down after 1 or 2 losses and spend most of the time scouting and repositioning if necessary. This round perfectly showcases why positioning is important as multiple champions, including Samira and Fiora, get stunned repeatedly by Scion. Had Faye positioned properly, this likely would have been a win instead of a loss. When the option is a rock or a hard place, such as the case when the 2 compositions have Trundle 3, there's not much you can do except play towards the board you're most likely to win against. In this case, Faye chooses to try and dodge the Vi 3, since getting punched into oblivion is not the exciting moment she's looking for this game. Another key thing to note is that with so many Blitzcranks in the late game, you ideally have Kaisa being pulled so she can dash out right afterwards and hopefully live. We'll see this done repeatedly throughout the rest of the game. It's a top 3, and Faye manages to find Samira 3, putting her in a potential winning position this game. But the Trundle 3 composition is still looking scary, so the plan for now is to focus entirely on positioning and hope that the Colossus Mutant player loses so she can focus entirely on the 1v1 positioning. Not making the same mistake as before, Faye avoids the Scion and positions her carries to take down the beefy Cho'Gath, taking the win and increasing her chances of finishing in the top 2. We're into a top 2 position, and the rest of the game is decided entirely on positioning. Ideally, Faye wants Kai'Sa to be pulled, and Fiora plus Samira to try to snipe down the Trundle, but it seems the Troll proved too strong this round. Unfortunately, the Trundle 3 was too good, and without more health to mess with positioning, Faye took the loss and ended the game in 2nd place. Overall, this game showcases the importance of scouting and positioning. There were a few key moments that may have saved Faye a bit of extra health had she scouted and positioned better. The extra health may have meant one more round to position against the Trundle player, which she has been able to beat at least once before. Goes to show that even though we sound like a broken record, preaching about scouting and positioning does make a difference. That's all for today, folks. This will be our last video for 2021 as the holiday season is upon us. We hope you have a wonderful holiday season, and we'll see you again in January with more TFT content. Let us know in the comment section below if you have any holiday plans or just plan to stay in and play lots of TFT. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to like button, subscribe, future Giant Slayer TFT videos.